stories, a massive manhunt is underway for the attackers who bombed Mindanao State University on Sunday, which killed 4 people and injured dozens of others. We'll get updates on the case from Army spokesperson Colonel Xerxes Trinidad, live in studio.
The Philippine Coast Guard says more than 135 Chinese vessels are seen swarming the Julian Felipe Reef in the West Philippine Sea, a situation it called alarming.
And in a rare move, Vice President Sara Duterte rebukes President Marcos for resuming peace talks with communist rebels, calling the deal an agreement with the devil. Welcome to the show. I'm Regina.
I'm Gretchen.
We don't have Shawn Yao tonight. Straight into our top stories tonight because we have got a packed lineup. A massive manhunt is now underway for the attackers who bombed a Catholic mass in Marawi on Sunday that has killed at least 4 people and left several others injured.
The Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attack, but the armed forces say they are still verifying the claim. Marian Enriquez has the big story.
May sumabog dito sa emisyon, may sumabog.
This was the chaos that ensued at the Mindanao State University in Marawi City. A Sunday mass turned deadly after a bomb exploded, killing at least 4 people and injuring dozens.
Pidigab! Pidigab! Oh, magsakay kayo! Dito! Allahu Akbar!
People were blooded and in panic, seeking the nearest available help. In the gymnasium, the blast left a horrific sight, lifeless bodies and people in unimaginable pain. Our news team was able to speak with Jasmine Lucero, who was sitting just a few meters away from where the bomb exploded. She said someone sat on the chair where the bomb was strapped on.
Kita ko siyang umupo, pero hindi ko alam na may dala siya or ano. Basta nung nag-start na yung mass, naka-focus na kami sa ano. Tapos bago mag-first reading, yun na po, bigla na lang pumutok. Yung nakita kong katawan nung umupo na ano.
Among those killed in the blast is Riza Ramos, who only accompanied her son, who was a third-year journalism student in MSU.
Sakit, paminahon ba?
Ang sakit. Sobra itong nangyaring pagkamatay ng asawa ko. Hindi ako makapaniwala na nagsimba lang siya. Doon pa pala siya mamamatay. Doon po talaga sumabog.
The armed forces of the Philippines now have at least 2 persons of interest in the bombing. They're also looking at the incident as a possible retaliatory attack from the group Dawla Islamiyah after the military operations that killed 11 of their members in Maguindanao del Sur just recently. They're also verifying reports of ISIS involvement after the group claimed responsibility for the attack.
We're looking at all aspects. We're looking at all the angles. Remember that when the Marawi siege happened here, it was the Dawla Islamiyah Southeast Asia group that claimed that they were in control of what was happening here. Right? So again, we are not disclaiming that possibility that there are links towards international ISIS groups.
President Bongbong Marcos also condemned in the strongest possible terms the heinous acts, which he said was perpetrated by foreign terrorists. The president vowed to bring these perpetrators to justice. The vice president also condemned the attack but called for calm and vigilance.
Nananawagan ako sa mga lahat ng Pilipino, lalo na sa mga Mindanawan, na maging mahinahon habang nagsasagawa ng investigasyon ang mga otoridad.
Meanwhile, Defense Chief Gilbert said there is nothing to worry about for the holidays in terms of national security.
Hindi po dapat ikabahala ng ating mga kababayan dahil nasa amin po ang responsibilidad na pangalagaan ang kanilang kaligtasan sa mga ganitong insidente.
Marawi City is now under heightened alert. Police are also on red alert status across Mindanao and on heightened alert in Metro Manila. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
In a statement, the United States condemned the horrific terrorist attack. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said Washington is in close contact with Manila and stands with Filipinos in rejecting the act of violence. Meanwhile, in a post on X, formerly Twitter, Pope Francis said, "I wish to assure my prayer for the victims of the attack. I am close to the families and people of Mindanao who have already suffered so much.
In other news, in a rare move, Vice President Sara Duterte rebuked President Bongbong Marcos for resuming peace talks with the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. In a video posted on Facebook today, Duterte called the deal a, quote, agreement with the devil. She also criticized Marcos's efforts to grant pardon to captured rebel groups through several proclamations. This is over a joint statement signed in the Norwegian capital of Oslo last week, where government and the NDFP agreed to restart peace negotiations 6 years after former President Rodrigo Duterte scrapped it. Today also so happens to be the 5th anniversary of the National Task Force to End the Local Communist Armed Conflict, or NTF-LCAC.
Mr. President, the government's statement with the NDFP in Oslo was an agreement with the devil. Napatunayan na natin sa kasaysayan na hindi sila seryoso at wala silang sinseridad sa usaping pangkapayapaan. Gagamitin nila itong peace negotiation sa pagtraidor sa pamahalaan at paglinlang sa taong bayan. We appeal to your power to review these proclamations and agreements.
Here to talk about what we've just covered, Sunday's attack and the revived peace talks, we have Philippine Army spokesperson Colonel Xerxes, Trinidad. Good evening, Colonel. Thank you so much for coming all the way here.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, and Ma'am Gretchen and Ma'am Regina. First of all, I would like to correct, I'm the Chief Public Affairs Office, no longer the Army spokesperson.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. So Chief Public Affairs Office of the
Armed Forces of the
AFP.
Philippines.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. First, let's talk about the Sunday bombing. What else do we know about this?
Well, basically, we have heard the news that around 7:14 in the morning, during the first Sunday Mass on the Advent Mass, was being held at, inside the MSU, compound. A blast actually hurt around four people dead, and around initially there was 50, but right now it was confirmed that around 55 were actually injured, and out of the 55, only 7 are still in the hospital recuperating.
Paano po kaya nakapasok yung bomba, and what type of bomb did they use?
Well, initial investigations revealed that together with the PNP that we have identified accordingly that these are improvised explosive devices being created, and as of now ongoing pa po ang ating investigation. We're looking into the details as to the angles of how and who actually...
You can't release those details
who
yet.
would actually committed this particular terror actions of terror.
So IED.
Yes po, ma'am.
The Islamic State has claimed this bombing attack. Does the armed forces have any doubts on that?
Well, basically, we are monitoring this particular report on the a news report, basically, that we have monitored that ISIS claimed this particular action. And again, we are yet to validate these particular reports, and we are also looking on the different possibilities or angles. As we all know, on the past or recent days prior to the particular attack, we have made some gains for this, from this local terrorist group, wherein 11, actually, to include their leader, was neutralized in Maguindanao del Sur.
Dawla Islamiyah?
Yeah, the DI Philippines. And just a day before that is the neutralization of the Abu Sayyaf group sub-leader was neutralized in Basilan province. And even prior to that morning, there were reports that there are lots of neutralization on this particular local terrorist group. And that's why the reason is we are looking into that particular possibility. This is considered to be a retaliatory attack. But as of now, with the ongoing investigation, we hope to really validate all of these informations that we are gathering.
Yeah, we were also covering that the operations on Friday. Actually, we saw that on Friday, yung DI Dawla Islamiyah, when by neutralizing mean killed, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So we were also covering that. How did you? So now we're trying to connect the dots here, and there is a possibility that this is retaliatory attacks, is what you're saying.
Yes, ma'am. No? But we are also not discounting of these particular news reports that we are receiving and been monitoring that ISIS has now claimed to be the one
What do you think could
responsible for this
be
particular attacks.
their motive?
Well, that's one thing that we're very pressed on identifying the motive now. But what we on the part of the armed forces, we are looking on all these particular possibilities. And we would like to validate all these informations that we are gathering. And hopefully, one of the investigation or the focus of the investigation is about the bombs that was used, and this could give us an idea of what or who are behind these particular
Do we have
actions.
cameras to identify faces?
We have been coordinating with our PNP counterparts, and all of these CCTV outputs are already being captured and monitored and being evaluated as of now.
right.
And I think we have to wait for the investigation to finish.
I understand there's still a lot of questions that you're still trying to get the answer to, Colonel, so pasensya na. But
No problem.
we also know that Prime Minister Sinarambo said may kumalat daw na text messages about the blast the night before. And we were just wondering, were these not considered serious threats?
Well, ma'am, of course, we have these particular, these are classification of informations that we have to look into. And all of these, their stories saying that they received this information, and yet they still pursued, maybe a problem on their part. But what we're saying here is that all these particular angles are being reviewed and validated as of now during the investigation.
Senator Bato de la Rosa said there may be a failure of intelligence. What would lead him to say such thing?
Well, ma'am, if there's an action that really happened already, you could immediately conclude that it's a failure of intelligence. But may I point out that a day before, even days before, the neutralization of these armed groups, particularly the Dawla Islamiyah Philippines, the members of the ASG, these are intelligence initiated operations.
ASG Abu Sayyaf Group.
Yes, even with the ASG, Abu Sayyaf Group, and this DI, these are all initiated, intelligence-initiated actions by the military. These kinds of formations are being addressed and neutralized. So I cannot categorically say that there's immediately a failure of intelligence on that part. But what we're looking into the bigger picture of how these particular groups were able to execute it.
Do you think if this is an isolated incident, how many of these bombings have we had in the past years?
Well, of course, ma'am, this could be an isolated case, but from the previous situations wherein we had our Marawi siege during that time, and we don't want that to happen again. And we are actually finishing all of these remnants of these particular groups who have consolidated in Marawi City. And maybe, we cannot say actually if this could be a way of them saying that, hey, we're not yet done. And we really have to push forward in neutralizing these people. And that's the reason why just this morning, the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines was actually instructed and went there to the area in Marawi City to make sure that all the commanders are informed and on top of the situation. And that is to actually, with one goal in mind, that is to apprehend or neutralize these responsible groups, considered not just a person, but a group that we have to pursue after.
You use the term remnants, and I'm just wondering, does the army still consider the Islamist rebels a threat, right? Because there was a period of time I feel that we thought, things neutralized, as you have said.
And to add to
but
that,
we thought na
Sulu was declared Abu Sayyaf free,
Yes,
the
ma'am.
Silan also,
but now,
and then this happens.
exactly. And we thought we were not, completely rid of them, maybe, but neutralized in your terms, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So now, are you saying that they are once again a threat?
Again, ma'am, there are a few of them who are left behind. And part of our a program in our effort, the armed forces, is to prevent further recruitment to their groups. Even though how many personalities you have neutralized, or means to say they surrendered or even killed in an encounter, but the fact remains, if there is a continuous recruitment, there will always be fresh bloods coming into the group, and it will be addressed accordingly. And this thing our effort is to really eradicate this radicalization of our community. And doon naman po lahat nangyayari. And we have to prevent this particular recruitment.
Kapag sinabi niyo pong Abu Sayyaf free, what does that mean?
Well, there are parameters being considered by the one declaring this an Abu Sayyaf free. It's as lame as with an area where there is drug-free community. I think recently itong ating other provinces have claimed or municipalities claim to be Abu Sayyaf free. There are certain parameters that they would require, not necessarily the total
Elimination.
elimination,
okay.
but there are particular, means to say, maybe there are no more members from the Abu Sayyaf joining in that particular group, in that particular area. And there have been no recorded incidents on the particular time period that you could say actually that there's Abu Sayyaf free or even insurgency free. And we are preventing the recurrence of these particular armed groups threatening our community.
But it does not necessarily mean there are zero Abu
Yes,
Sayyaf
ma'am.
members at that moment in time.
Yes, ma'am.
Ah, okay. Because I always assume that when you declare an area as a rebel-free, communist, terrorist-free, it means wala na talaga.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So as I was saying, ma'am, again, we have to look into the further joining of these new recruits. We have to prevent recruitment. And that's one way we could be assured that these particular groups will no longer exist.
Are you also looking into the angle of the timing of this bombing coming after the proclamations of the president regarding granting amnesty to rebels and also the peace talks with the CPP, NP, and DF? Are you also checking out that angle na baka ito ay maaaring to botch the peace talks?
Well, again, with regard to the peace talks, wala pa pong peace talk. Just to be clear about that, these are just exploratory talks with the, I think, with the Oslo joint statement that was mentioned just recently, signed by our government and the AFP. So, as to the timing, ma'am, there's no specific timing as to the acts of terror. Their goal there is to terrorize the community and everybody. Is to instill fear among the people, regardless of any declaration of so what. I think these acts of terror are not looking into. But what we're looking into, the facts are mostly why they did it. It's not about the timing, but what are they trying to attain in that particular action. And that's why we had that particular angle, because they're already on a point of extinction, since we have neutralized most of their members, particularly the Abu Sayyaf, and there are many surrenders basically from the Abu Sayyaf group, and with our prevention of their recruitment process to include these members of the Dawla Islamiyah Philippines. So we cannot just attribute that particular timing of this particular bombing. That's what I'm saying.
But Colonel, one of our other news items today was the Vice President, Sara Duterte, coming out to say that this is an agreement with the devil, and basically she doesn't agree with it. So now you have the President and the Vice President completely in opposite sides of one issue.
On our part, ma'am, if I'll be commenting on that one, I don't see that there will be on a total disagreement on that part. It's more of, I think most of our people are preempted with these particular informations that if you are going to have a peace negotiation with this particular group, they will be doing again these decades of deceptions that they have been doing on the previous administrations. That when they enter the peace talk, they would demand something like freeing of these political prisoners, all of these particular demands. And yet, at the end, the government is in the losing end without their promises or their part of the deal not complying with it. So I think the Vice President has been banking on those premises. However, on these exploratory talks that was signed during the Oslo joint statement, there was no actual talks between peace negotiations. None yet. It's just an opening. If the Philippines and these particular NDFP would be willing to talk on a certain objective of abandoning the armed struggle, and that's very important. that if the NDFP would abandon this particular armed struggle, I think it's for the purpose of peace, a long-lasting peace for our country.
So what you're saying is you do see where the vice president is coming from
Yes,
when
ma'am.
she warns about that. Do you feel like if you do get into the nitty-gritty of it, into the real peace talks, do you feel like it's going to be different this time around? Because, of course, all the previous presidents have tried and failed to fix this problem.
I think we're not coming from a resumption. It's actually a new deal. It's a new possible talks with this particular group. And of course, based from our experiences, that's I think most of our critics and even the vice president is coming from. And basically from these premises that these groups have not been fulfilling, particularly their end of the deal or their part of the agreement. So I think the government right now is very watchful and will not enter to such agreement like all of these conditions. It was actually mentioned by the Secretary Galvez in a statement that there will be no negotiations or preconditions to this particular soon to loom peace negotiations.
Meaning,
if ever.
Colonel, you're going to take a hard line with them.
Yes.
Okay. So yun yung iba this time around.
And aside from that, we are actually gaining grounds on the neutralizations. And if I may borrow from the statement of our Chief of Staff, basically there are no more active guerrilla fronts. And we have been complying with the directive of the President to ensure that we will be able to finish off insurgency so that the armed forces can now focus on a bigger threat looking to our country. And that is not just internal security, but more of the territorial defense of our country.
So you're saying that we are now effectively shifting towards external security, and essentially the internal threats are very, very minimal, even with what happened in Marawi.
Yes, ma'am. Basically, when we say territorial defense, we're not abandoning the internal security problems or situations in our country. When you say territorial defense, that is focusing on the external, at the same time looking at our internal. So we will not abandon the internal security operations, although we'll be focusing more of ourselves on projecting.
So in terms of budget, you would
Yes.
recommend majority of it would go
Definitely,
towards
ma'am. We need to actually start now. If we really wanted to project our security capabilities in trying to protect our country on its maritime and on its airspace, we need to refocus on a modernization program of the armed forces.
Speaking of that, Colonel, there was an article published on the Nikkei yesterday, the Japanese newspaper. I don't know if you've seen it, so I'm going to recap it for you. It said that the U.S. military is planning to deploy ground-based intermediate-range missiles in the Indo-Pacific in 2024. Now, they didn't mention exactly where. Of course, we can all guess. But if it comes down to it, would we be willing to host more American military capabilities?
Well, part of the trust of the armed forces of the Philippines, ma'am, it's our self-reliant defense posture, wherein more of our developments or our capabilities are being developed towards on how protecting the territorial defense of our country. And those are part of the modernization program. It's part of our horizon in acquiring this particular ground-based missiles. That is to really project not just from the land base, but basically our capability from the Navy and from our Air Force. So yes, ma'am, we will be expecting more from our armed forces as we go with our enhancement in our capabilities.
I don't mean our own missile capabilities. I mean, if the U.S. asks to deploy their own missiles, these are land-based missiles, intermediate-range missiles, would we be willing to host them?
Well, on that matter, ma'am, I think it still has to be discussed with our security department on that particular matter. As we all know, we actually host only these enhanced our EDCA sites here for the logistics base, but not this basically for any offensive, as made mentioned by our president.
You've seen the images over the weekend also of the swarming of the Chinese ships in the West Philippine Sea near the Spratly Islands. Are we looking towards multilateral patrols in that area?
Ma'am Gretchen, we have already started our maritime cooperative activity with the U.S. and just recently with the Australia. And this is going to happen more often as we try to improve and conduct our interoperability with, and actual interoperability with these particular allied countries and partner countries in trying to project on how we conduct ourselves in
Kaya
this
lang nakita
particular
po natin
maritime
ilang araw lang
domain.
yun, ano?
Yes, ma'am.
What are you looking towards moving? I mean, is it going to be a regular joint patrol or symbolic or ano po ba?
Well, it has to be passed through with our defense on the particular agreement on how frequent are we going to conduct this particular MCA or maritime cooperative activity. But as mentioned, it's going to be more and more. We expect more from this. And on our exercises that we're conducting, this is a longer period. The MCA is actually an actual on-the-ground activity for interoperability between our Navy vessels and that of our foreign counterparts. So you could actually see from the training exercises to the actual execution, if we really could actually be comparable and be interoperable to each other when we do particular naval exercises or even patrolling, and to include our air patrols.
So there's no plans at the moment to ramp up patrols next year?
Most likely, ma'am.
Okay. We're going to have to leave that there. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and shedding light on all these issues. That was Philippine AFP Public Affairs Chief Colonel Xerxes Trinidad. We're going to pause for a quick one now, but after that, officials say over 100 Chinese militia vessels, as we were just saying, were seen swarming the Julian Felipe Reef in the West Philippine Sea. The details when the big story returns. Keep it here.
Welcome back. You're still with us here on The Big Story on One News. Chinese militia vessels are at it again. The Coast Guard says some 135 of them were spotted swarming the Julian Felipe or Whitsun Reef in the West Philippine Sea over the weekend. The footage you are seeing was released by the PCG, which has described the increased presence of Chinese vessels in the area as alarming. Back in November 13, the PCG reported that 111 Chinese militia vessels were spotted in the vicinity of Julian Felipe Reef. But with this latest monitoring, they found that the number has grown to 135. In response, the National Security Council has deployed maritime patrols to challenge the illegal presence of Chinese vessels in the area. Sabi naman ni NSC Assistant Director General Jonathan Malaya, pinark lang daw ng China ang kanilang mga barko. But Malaya also noted that China seems to be sending a message.
Wala tao yung mga yan, no?
Talagang nakapark.
Pinark lang nila yan dyan. There may
baka may
be a
konti.
skeletal crew there. It's just there, just, to show to the world na etong lugar na yan ay sa amin. And tayo po, we do not accept that. And we will also, we are deploying our assets as well para ipakita rin sa China na hindi tayo, na hindi natin ito tinatanggap at pinuprotesta natin yung kanilang swarming na ginagawa.
The PCG says they issued up to 9 radio challenges to the Chinese vessels. And this video of one of those radio challenges that we're about to show you is proof that the ships were unmanned.
You are sailing within Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone and Kalayaan Island Group. Your refusal to respond will be reported and will be dealt with accordingly.
Right, but it's not just Julian Felipe Reef, Gretch. Chinese militia vessels, some 12 of them, were also spotted in the vicinity of Escoda Shoal, while a Chinese warship of the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, was also seen from a distance. National Security Advisor Eduardo Año likewise monitored the presence of some Chinese ships near Pag-asa Island. And this brings the total number of Chinese vessels in the West Philippine Sea monitored just over the weekend to roughly 162.
Is China really trying to send a message? To help us answer that, we have with us on the show Attorney Gilbert Andres, Executive Director at the Center for International Law, or Center Law. Good evening. Welcome to The Big Story.
Good evening.
Okay, before we, alam naman natin nagsaswarm na yung Chinese vessels, But I'd like to get into the facts of this. We know that the Spratly Islands are contested islands. So, are they part of our territorial sea or are they part of our EEZ?
Right. Based on the arbitral award, actually all of the islands in the Kalayaan Island groups that were subject of the arbitral award, they're actually low tide elevations. Meaning to say, if they're low tide elevations, they're not subject to any maritime entitlements. They're not subject to a territorial sea, to the contiguous zone, or an exclusive economic zone. Ergo, the consequence of that is that since they're all inside our exclusive economic zone, then the Philippines has sovereign rights over the Kalayaan Island groups.
Okay, pero kasi sinabi ng iyong colleague na si Attorney Romel Bagares, ang sabi niya, the PCG finally gets it right. Julian Felipe Reef is located 175 nautical miles west of Bataraza, Palawan, and is a low tide elevation within the territorial sea of Chigua Reef, over which the Philippines has sovereignty. So, bakit nga po ba? Yung Chigua Reef, I think it's also somewhere in the middle of the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea. Ano po ba yung sovereignty natin doon and territorial sea natin?
Kasi if it's an island that is not low tide elevation and then it's capable of sustaining human habitation, meaning to say it can be a subject of sovereignty by occupation.
So yung Chigua Reef is part of our territorial sea?
It's our territory since we have occupation of it. So, meaning to say, if we occupy it, then we actually have it has its own territorial sea. So,
okay. Now I get
for
it.
example, Pag-asa Island, we actually have effective occupation. And Pag-asa Island is actually capable of sustaining human habitation. In fact, may mga Filipinos doon. Diba? It's actually a barangay. So, meaning to say, it's our very own territory. Pero kung, for example, Mischief Reef, is just a low tide elevation. It cannot sustain its own economic life. So it cannot be subject of occupation. It cannot be subject of any appropriation. So in fact, since it's not subject of any appropriation, even though China actually has de facto occupation, so meaning to say it's subject to our
So itong Julian
EEZ.
Felipe Reef ay EEZ ng Chigua
EEZ.
Reef of which we occupy.
Yes.
Okay. Are they allowed, is the Chinese allowed to park their vessels in our EEZ?
No, because in fact, the implication that it's an EEZ is that the state has exclusive sovereign rights to exploit its living and non-living resources. So the fact that they have not even asked us, and in fact we are prohibiting them, means to say they're already violating international law.
Teka lang, attorney. This logic that we own it, it's ours, just because we're occupying it, is it not problematic? I mean, does the whole world recognize that that is our territory, or it's just our claim to it?
In fact, okay, let's take for example Pag-asa Island. In fact, that's general international law that effective occupation gives title to that territory. So, meaning to say, the fact that we occupy it, we're already fulfilling general international law. In fact, in the arbitral award, the territorial dispute was never an issue because that's not within the jurisdiction of the arbitral body. So, the only issues there are the maritime entitlements. The only issue, the first, what are the characterizations of these so-called maritime features?
Yes,
are they islands?
Are they
rocks?
sandbars?
Are they sandbars?
Low
Are
tide
they
elevations?
low tide
Yeah.
elevation? Kasi how they are characterized will have a legal consequence under the UNCLOS.
So yung mga atoll na tinayuan ng Chinese ng kanilang mga base, sa kanila na
Sprat
yun,
Place.
effectively.
Oh, kaso the problem there is it's merely low tide elevation. So it's not subject of appropriation. So even if they made some artificial islands there, they cannot actually say that we can occupy it. They cannot actually have any entitlement to it
Sorry,
under
why
the
not?
UNCLOS.
Why not? They built it.
Kasi the theory there is, under the UNCLOS, on its own, naturally. Okay? So,
okay.
Mischief Reef, di ba, in fact, there's a airport there right now.
Yes.
But under the UNCLOS, it's merely a low tide elevation. So, they cannot appropriate it.
And we can't also
We can
appropriate
also,
anything.
yes, correct.
So it doesn't matter for us to,
So,
have
actually,
a territorial dispute over it.
the consequence there, whether or not we occupy it, that's not the question. The fact that these are within our exclusive economic zone means to say we have exclusive sovereign rights over those shoals.
What is allowed over our EEZ? I believe innocent passage is one
Right
of
of
them.
innocent passage, yes. In fact, even in the territorial sea, a right of innocent passage is even allowed. Oo. Pero that means to say that there is no, it's really innocent. So it's not a violation of the sovereign rights.
But first, I think we have to define exactly what constitutes innocent passage. I mean, to our minds, it's self-explanatory. But legally, what is the definition of innocent passage?
Well, if you really just look at the terms, innocent passage, meaning to say any passage there is not detrimental to the coastal state. Meaning to say there's no collection of resources, there's no collection of intelligence, there's no propositioning of some offensive weapons. So it should really be innocent.
But
It will not adversely affect the coastal state.
These new ones that were spotted in Whitsun Reef and Julian Felipe Reef, they were unmanned. Does it not constitute as innocent?
No, it's not innocent passage because in the first place,
They're not passing, they're
not
mooring.
passing, they're mooring. In fact, they're already affecting our own freedom of navigation in our own EEZ. So it's
Kahit na
not, definitely
unmanned.
it's not innocent passage.
I believe this is not new. Seeing more than 100 ships in the Spratly Islands. Back in 2021, spokesman Harry Roque said that there were over 200 ships swarming that area. And ang sinasabi niya nung panahon na yun, ng 2021, the Philippines was never in possession of Julian Felipe Reef. So, is that true?
Well, to be frank, I don't have the exact details on the Julian Felipe Reef. Kasi if you look at the arbitral award, actually it tries to classify the different types of shoals there and rocks. So essentially, we just have to go back to the arbitral award. How was it characterized, these different maritime
Ang sabi
features?
kasi niya, the Julian Felipe Reef is outside the EEZ, but claimed by the Philippines through a Marcos-era presidential decree.
Okay. So, ganito lang ang magiging legal theory na. Let's just look at the principles, whatever is the maritime feature. If it's an island, it's capable of habitation, it's capable of economic life, then it can actually be appropriated. So the only question there is there actually effective occupation by the Philippines? Meaning to say, we have a flag planted there, we have a camp there, we have lighthouses there. So that's the big issue. So, but if it's merely a rock, it's merely a low tide elevation, then it cannot be appropriated.
Is that the reason why I was looking at the Spratly Islands? Tapos iba-iba yung kulay niya. Meron some occupied by Vietnam, meron iba by China, may iba by the
Taiwan.
Philippines. Kahit magkakatabi. Kasi may effective occupation.
Yes. Pero let's be very specific. Baka ito yung mga islands na hindi siya subject ng arbitral award. Maybe these are the islands that are really not in dispute in terms of its maritime entitlements. So kung hindi siya covered ng arbitral award, then we cannot invoke the arbitral award. We have to look at general international law. At kung occupied siya, meaning to say, hindi siya change, it wasn't changed, these are not artificial islands. So the issue there is not under the UNCLOS. It's under general international law. And general international law is, if it's island capable of appropriation, do they have effective occupation?
But the problem remains that China does not recognize that arbitral award.
Well, it should not be an issue. Because in fact, they have a obligation under UNCLOS. In fact, when they entered into the UNCLOS, when they became a state party, they agreed also with the dispute resolution mechanism. Kasi it's useless eh. You have a treaty obligation and yet you don't adhere to any dispute resolution. So mayroong Annex 7 doon. And in fact, in Annex 7, they actually recognize the compulsory jurisdiction of the arbitral body that essentially decided it.
Ito nung
And yet to this day, we're still contesting that.
Noong 2021, ang sinabi pa rin ng China as the reason for the 200 ships that were swarming in the area of Julian Felipe, sabi nila, the fishing boats were just sheltering from bad weather.
That's not true. Kasi in fact, we know the season. Okay? Kung when are there typhoons. And it should be somewhere from June to maybe November. So if it happened beyond that, there's no typhoon. Secondly, if they're really hiding because of inclement weather, then if the inclement weather ceases, then they should not have any more right under international law.
Okay.
A separate code of conduct with other ASEAN members, do you think that will work?
Well, that will work. But I think the basis really of any code of conduct should be the UNCLOS. Number 2 should be the arbitral award. Because in fact, when we won that July 12, 2016 arbitral award, essentially we won it also for Southeast Asia. Because in fact, it invalidates the 9-dash line claim of China. So China cannot use historic rights under the 9-dash line because it's outside of their treaty obligation.
And what do you think, what else can we do? Can the Philippine government do to strengthen its claim over the islands in the West Philippine Sea, specifically that region where we saw the swarming of Chinese boats?
In fact, we have a very specific, we have a very specific act that we want to recommend. In fact, I recommend this together with Attorney Bagares and Dr. Melissa Loa. It's for the President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to issue a proclamation. What's the proclamation about? It will actually try to enumerate our maritime entitlements under the arbitral award, because this will really show that even in our domestic sphere, we're actually implementing and executing the arbitral award. So I think that's one of the first steps, a proclamation from President Marcos Jr.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you for joining us tonight. That was a lot of information. Thank you so much. Attorney Gilbert Andres, Executive Director at the Center for International Law, or Center Law. We're going to pause for another quick one, but right after that, the Supreme Court has asked Vice President Sara Duterte to respond to the petition challenging the constitutionality of her confidential funds in 2022. The details when we return. You're still watching a big story here in One News. Former President Rodrigo Duterte was a no-show on the first day of the preliminary investigation into the alleged grave threats against ACT Teachers Party list Representative Franz Castro. Two lawyers, though, arrived at the Quezon City Hall Court of Justice saying that the former president simply did not receive the subpoena. They didn't face the media for interviews. Different militant groups showed up in front of the court to show support for Castro, but also present were supporters of the former president. Castro was dismayed over Duterte's absence, noting that she was ready to come face-to-face with Duterte.
As a respondent, dapat hinaharap niya yung kaso niya. Sinasabi nila, ina-allege nila na wala pa daw natanggap si ex-President Duterte ng subpoena at saka yung aking complaint. So wala pa daw siya natanggap at ngayon tinanggap nung dalawang counsel. So ang ibig sabihin, mag-aantay na naman tayo.
Now, in line with that, Castro has filed a supplemental affidavit on another alleged threat made by Duterte on November 16 this time in the same TV program cited in the initial case. The court gave Duterte 10 days to respond to Castro's new accusation. The preliminary investigation for that is set on December 15th.
Another bit of news on the OVP. The Supreme Court has asked Vice President Sara Duterte to respond to the petition challenging the constitutionality of her 125 million peso confidential fund request last year. In a notice dated November 14 and released by the court on Monday, Duterte, along with Executive Secretary Lucas Belsamin and Budget Secretary Amena Pangandaman, were compelled to comment within 10 days from notice. This was the case filed on November 7 by a group of petitioners led by former COMELEC Chair Christian Monsod, asking the High Court to declare the transfer of 125 million pesos to the OVP in 2022 as unconstitutional. They also want the justices to order the Vice President to return the money to the Treasury Department. Once the comments are submitted, the petitioners have 5 days to reply. So far, it's only been Pangandaman who has issued a statement on the matter. Through her agency, the DBM said Pangandaman had, quote, taken cognizance of the matter and that they're, quote, working closely with the Office of the Solicitor General.
We're ending the show tonight with a big story in sports. Our big picture tonight is PBA Ironman LA Tenorio, who made a rousing comeback to Ginebra with a win over Terra Firma. Before the Gin Kings' 110-99 victory over Terra Firma, they gave a heartwarming tribute to Tenorio, who had just emerged from his battle with cancer. Tenorio was declared cancer-free just this September. And he didn't disappoint. Tenorio gave quite the show, scoring 6 points for Ginebra to mark his return.
Well, the captain is back. Who wouldn't love a recovery story?
It's
right?
nice, and always nice to end the newscast on a positive note, right? Overcoming cancer is such a huge battle, but he's managed to do it and fight his way through.
Well, apart from that, I think the fans are also glad to see him on court. You know, he's never missed a game before he was declared that he had cancer since he entered the PBA. So just imagine, I mean, being able to get back out there and showing a face that's familiar to the fans.
Exactly. And, you know, making those baskets, making those points, right? To just the sheer will it takes to be able to get back on that hard court after something like cancer. So,
well, no matter how, you know, huge the opponent is, just like China, we always have hope.
I like that. We always have hope. There is always hope. But for now, that is the show tonight.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.